Losses are really valuable because they teach you something that you thought was true about your user that's not. That's great because all those learnings pave the way for some future revelation that you have. So it's like, what a loss if you don't actually go back in and review all the research that you've learned over time to then validate that up against this new hypothesis that you have.
Welcome back to another episode of Chew on CRO. I'm joined by Ned today, as usual, and we are going to go through a list of mistakes a lot of brand owners are doing when it comes to their website, whether it be A/B testing, CRO testing, just making things up almost, right? Yeah. So I definitely want to kick into it. I know you have a list prepared. Yep. Let's get right into it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. We see things happen all the time, right? Where clients will come to us and we kind of look at the extent of what they have been running experimentation or not, or just general ideas that they have is another big one. Some misconceptions and kind of just starting from the top of the funnel down is more often than not, brands spend a disproportionate amount of time on the homepage when they shouldn't. And here's the biggest reason why is when we think about the traditional funnel and how we've always been educated by it, and we've kind of falsely followed into this narrative, is that people will land on your homepage, they'll see your initial value proposition, they'll go, okay, it's interesting, they'll scroll down, they'll read your additional supporting points, your social proof, your authority call outs, then maybe they'll watch the how it works video or the science behind the product or whatever it is. And then as they scroll down this homepage, they get more and more educated, at which there's this tipping point where once they have enough education, they're willing to click to the next step. And now they're willing to browse products. Then they identify which product's right for them, maybe click in a little bit deeper, understand the specific nuances of that product, and then they add it to cart, and then they think about an upsell, and then they move to checkout. The reality is having studied, thousands of brands' paths at this point, is that funnel doesn't really exist, right? People land and they go through this dramatic spastic behavior where they'll go all the way into PDPs, back to the home page, they'll go left, right, up, down, they'll go all these different directions. Right. So one thing I have found is hyper consistent is new users specifically don't scroll down much. And on home pages are notorious for this, where what you'll find is the average scroll depth will be like one frame below the fold. So when you look at the average scroll depth and you say, you've got this page that say 6-7 scrolls until you get to the actual bottom, I mean, you're talking single digit percentage, even makes it to the 50% scroll mark or lower. So the reality is I see a lot of teams will obsess about, well, where's this video going to go in this content? And we got to build it. And it's like hardly anyone's seeing that. Like literally 6 out of every 100 people even see it. It's statistically insignificant. So a lot of times what we see is brands will spend way too much time on below fold assets, education, styling. Well, we should do this branding and this style. And it's like, it's for naught. Like people don't even look at it. You know what I mean? It just gets such little visibility. So a couple things there. One is just understanding that the reality is you really have two home pages. You've got your home page, yes, but then you have the actual home page, which is the much more truncated version of what people look at. And that's generally about one full frame below the fold, right? So on a mobile device, you obviously have the one full frame above, which is your kind of splash event. And then you look at one full frame below the fold, which is that equivalent amount of real estate. And that's pretty much it. That's really the reality of what you need to look at. So in that bit of space, you need to say, who are we? What are we offering? To whom is it for? You don't have to give it all there, but you have to give snapshots to it, right? So it's not like you have to list all the reviews there, or all the different value props, but your meatiest, like strongest ones you really need right below or right above the fold. Everything else is just pertaining to maybe 10 to 20% at most of users, and that's it. Yeah. So
I find myself in that boat because we do have a lot to offer in terms of products and number of SKUs, right? Yep. So naturally what you want to do is, all right, have your main banner of whatever it is that you're most likely advertising with your flagship, right? Sure. Then you go into the USPs, and then I want to showcase all the products that we have, right? So what do you think brands should be doing instead of just this massive catalog?
Yeah. Well, I mean, keep in mind that, so it's like, okay, well, if people don't scroll down, then what do they do? And the answer is they go to navigation. Right. So I found when I did new user studies, upwards of 80-ish% of new users on a mobile device go right to the hamburger menu. And so it's like, again, we spend all this time about, well, right below the fold in this banner and that banner, and it's like, and then they spend this much time on navigation. It's like navigation, it's like a Pareto distribution gets so much more click volume. It's like, that's where you need to focus your time. Your navigation needs to be very educational, which sounds almost challenging, like paradoxically, because it's like, well, wait a minute, it's navigation. That's
How
not
do
the
you even
education.
do that?
How do you even
Yeah.
educate? And it's like, well, let's talk about it, right? So take Avi as an example. Well, we have collections of products, but we also have use cases, which is to whom is it for? Maybe you're trying to deal with some weight challenges, right? Maybe you're trying to deal with better skin, better nails, better hair, whatever it is. Whatever you're most keen on, you can give that type of identification using corner treatments, visual cues, even total hierarchical structures on the navigation that pertain to the whom it's for, right? That's a value proposition, right? You can also highlight what are bestsellers, what are award-winning products, products that are classic to get bundled with others, right? So you can start to almost preemptively suggest the upsell, right, for maximum results. So navigation is disproportionately important across the board on any website. It doesn't matter, literally, if it's B2B, B2C, whatever, navigation is really important there. So from that perspective, it's like, okay, focus 80% of your time on your navigation, seriously, because that's where most new users are going to go.
I like how you said you should educate, and not in your traditional sense of like, you're not going to add everything in the nav menu, right? You have to be very concise of how you're saying things. And I think Hims does a really great job at this, right? Because they have products for hair, skin, nails, sex, whatever it is, right? Every single thing, it's your shop by goal.
Yeah.
And instead of saying like for Avi, it's like, all right, collagen powders or capsules or whatever, like that doesn't mean anything to anybody, right? It's like, let's just say collagen powders.
Yeah.
It's great for hair, skin, nails, joints, right? So instead of beauty, right, which doesn't really mean anything.
Sure.
If I'm coming in and I have a problem with hair or skin or nails, I literally, it's gonna sound like almost backwards, but I can have each section say hair, skin, nails, joints, can all go to the same collection.
Yeah.
But at least they know that what they're clicking on resonates with them.
Yeah, to whom is it for? Exactly right. Exactly. So when you look at the anatomical layouts of a new user storyline, it's like, again, what are you offering? What's good about it? And to whom is it for, right? So that use case is super important. So yeah, I mean, you nailed it there. And this is an easy test to run from a qualitative data perspective, right? Because you can just, again, get users together and then have them go into navigation and just talk out loud. They'll be very vocal on navigation, right? We have a really big supplement brand out of the UK, and we've been dealing with this where people get there and they've got different series, right? So they have products that are high in protein, kind of a meal replacement style, right? And so they've got their traditionals, and then they've got all the new versions that they've released, which all are like protein packs. So what we found is everyone was like, oh, so the originals aren't really protein rich. It's like, no, that's like the core essence of the brand is it was protein rich. But the way they labeled it is people get immediately confused. And so they start to create these false narratives in their mind, and you just watch the navigation just get derailed, right out of the gates. Because now here's the thing, had the user just gone through the home page carefully, all this would have been answered, but they don't do it, unfortunately. So it's one of those things where, again, it's like too much time I see brands spending on the architecture of the homepage and too little time on the navigation.
Makes sense.
On that note, by the way, we actually had one, this was a super audacious test. We had one fashion brand where we blew the entire homepage up and just kept the hero and navigation. That was it. It was navigation, hero, footer.
Wow.
And you already can probably guess it outperformed the regular.
Wow.
Just because, again, it wasn't that big
ballsy.
of a surprise. That's 'cause it was ballsy. But like nobody was scrolling down anyway. So we were like, we might as well just get them right into the place they're already going to go.
Interesting.
So it's one of those things where, again, people tend to get educated on their navigation and the PDP structures, PLP structures, less so on home pages, which is a very common misconception.
Have you noticed many people interact with your homepage banner at all compared to nav?
The actual hero banner? No, because like again, there's a website I think called banners don't work or carousels don't work. It's something like that. Where some guy was just so frustrated because his clients constantly wanted these rotating banners. Rotation carousels on here just don't work. And it's part of the statistic I just shared. People will give you this much time, no scrollability. They won't even wait for them to rotate. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Let me just go figure it out on my own. That's generally the mindset that they'll often have. So, with that being said, again, I think people spend way too much time there. And another angle to this, and this is kind of segueing into the next point, is people will often focus on like what's new to them as the brand owner. Meaning they're like, oh, well, we have this new release product. We should put that up there. And it's like, yeah, but what you're not realizing is 95% of the people coming to your site tomorrow are new to you as a brand.
Right.
Why would you not have your hero product there?
Yeah, and you're probably running ads for that.
And you're running ads, exactly. And then they're like, well, I don't get it. The PDP landings are doing better. And it's like, well, I get it, because you land and you've got this hero product that stood the brand up over the years, and now you're putting this new, novel, almost experimental product up there. And or they'll say things like this to me. They'll be like, oh, well, it's stale. To whom?
To you.
Yeah, to you. But
you're looking
not
at it every day.
the user, right? I mean, you're on the site every single day. The websites are predominantly, again, visited by people who are brand new to your brand, right? You know.
Well, what if you are sending a lot of customer traffic to your website? Is there any benefit to have that banner there?
Yeah, I mean, if you are one of the unique brands where the vast majority of your traffic is repeat customers, again, very rare for me to see, to be honest. But if that is the case,
or let's just say like on a launch, right? If you're launching a new product or whatever, you want to have something themed. Is there a benefit? And what I'm really trying to get at is more so like the level of adding personalization to your site, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen anything where, okay, well, if this is like a returning user or a customer, show them X, versus a new visitor, making sure that they see your hero product?
For sure.
Anything around that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because you think about it, let's assume Avi's about to release the next greatest tomorrow, right? I mean, the reality is you're going to put a lot of time and effort into the email itself, meaning that's really your landing event is actually the email.
Right.
Because people typically will open it and you'll be like, announce after years of formulation, we're releasing XYZ. Most people are gonna, if they're keen on it, are gonna get educated there at that step. And then they're gonna click from the email into most likely a PDP.
Right.
So once again, it's like I still don't really see, I mean, with the exception of maybe rare circumstances, ever where the homepage should be that predominantly focused on a new product release. You know, maybe in the ribbon,
right?
You know, but I mean, and we did this a lot with, you know, a really big teeth whitening brand that, you know, as a client for a long time. And it was like, again, a lot of the senior leadership always wanted to put like the new up there. And it was like, why don't we just go back to the tried and true what you guys built this brand off of? And that always outperformed every time we did it. So
makes sense.
Yeah. So again, kind of disproportionate focus on home pages, right, et cetera. Not enough focus on navigation is a big one. This kind of segues into another that I see all the time with brands. And I know we've talked on this on the podcast before, which is brands focusing way too much on a site redesign or a site rebuild. Can count on one hand, having seen probably 200-300 of those, the amount of times it worked, meaning the moment the new one went live, metrics went up. And frankly, in hindsight, really the only times it worked is when they did a platform migration. Like I saw a number of brands move from some kind of like janky CMS over to like a Shopify, which is super optimized, and they got a lift, but that was mainly because of like the systemic nature of Shopify's checkout, not really because of a redesign, right? So, and then here's the other problem, and I know we've touched on this before. Let's assume you go ahead and do it. Metrics are gonna move up or down, and like whatever, whether they move up or down. Here's the biggest problem. You don't know why. Is it the new imagery? Is it the new font files? Is it this hierarchical change that you did? Is it the navigation? So now you're left guessing. And so I constantly advise clients, like, you don't, generally speaking, ever need to just like nuke the site and redesign and rebuild. What I'd recommend is always go in incremental fashion. Test and iterate, right? So it's like, okay, if you have a hypothesis that this new image structure is going to convey a new premium look to the brand, okay, well, let's try it with some ads on a new design PDP with that image carousel and drive them right there, and let's see before you go kind of do the whole site over, right? And then and really almost paradoxically speaking, those site overhauls can still happen over time with experimentation, because as you test and iterate these things, at the end of that 6 months or 9 months, you've got a totally different looking experience, but you have data along the way. And the irony to the whole thing is oftentimes it goes faster than, I mean, you know how it goes, like total site redesigns and rebuilds are notoriously
we've gone
delayed.
through it.
Yeah, you know, they take forever. And so that's another big one. Right?
I want to double down on the hypothesis thing. How do you actually get to that point? How do you come up with the hypothesis? Because it's like the general consensus for the reason why somebody will want to do a redesign is because as an owner or operator, you're looking at it constantly, and to you it's stale, as to your earlier point. How do you tell somebody, or the business owner, it's like, have a reason to test something? Where do you get that reason from?
You got to go find the data that points to it. I mean, this is what you got to get into the metrics themselves, right? So as an example, I mean, you've got to go into your Google Analytics, if it's set up properly, you should have effectively events tagged to all the interaction and non-interaction events. So as an example, you've got a review carousel, right? And so as people interact with the review carousel, you find that they disproportionately have a higher propensity to convert. Therefore, you now have an introductory hypothesis to suggest the more reviews you demonstrate, this is very basic, the more likely someone's going to convert. So therefore, you want to redesign where the review section is. You want to move it up higher. You want to make it more visible. Blah, 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 whatever, right? And so that's a good hypothesis. At least you had a data point to measure it up against. Doesn't mean it's right, but at least you had a data point. And you kind of already hit the nail on the head, which is a lot of brands will do it because they feel it's stale and they are not the customer. They are the brand owner. And that's still a very important role, obviously, but you have the curse of knowledge. You're sitting at it, you're looking at it every single day. And it's almost impossible for a brand owner or anyone even works for the client or for the company to put themselves in the shoes properly of the first time user. It's almost impossible to do. So this is why you constantly need to lean on data to give you some of those insights and validate that with new user studies, right? Where you're bringing people together, you're literally handing them the phone or the device and saying, go to the site and just hear what they say. And you'll be shocked some of the things that come out, right? So last couple things here in terms of common mistakes that I see. And this one may sound obvious, but you'd be surprised how often this happens, which is reverting a test that won. I've seen this a number of times where you run a test, it's won. Even sometimes clients are like, we don't believe it, let's run it again. And it's like statistically significant a second time, it did win. And then somebody in the organization wants to can it just because it doesn't align with whatever down the road. And it's usually not right away. It's usually months down the line. So again, as you've heard me preach many times, if you have a CRO agency like ourselves as an example, they should have a database and a library of experiments that they've run. If you're doing it internally, you should have your own database and library of historical experiments. The first question you need to ask when you bring a new hypothesis to the table is, have we tested this before? Right? And again, like we get really busy. I mean, it's really hard to remember what we tested on Avi 18 months ago, it's really hard to remember. So it's like, have we tested this before? That will save you so much time. Because oftentimes you look at it and be like, oh yes, okay. And this is where most importantly, your losses come in. Because losses are really valuable because they teach you something that you thought was true about your user that's not. That's great because all those learnings pave the way for some future revelation that you have. So it's like, what a loss if you don't actually go back in and review all the research that you've learned over time to then validate that up against this new hypothesis that you have. You know what I mean? So super important to, before you ever revert anything, before you ever test anything or change anything, to go back to all the data that you have historically, and most importantly, the losses, not just the wins, but the losses as well, to validate if this makes sense or not.
No, I mean, keeping a log is actually so important because I think I've mentioned this before, but on our landing page, it is very text heavy, right? Especially the above the fold, very text heavy. And anybody who is in like CRO will send me a message like, I have the best test for you. And it's to decrease the amount of text on your above the fold. And I'm like, I've tested this countless times now. I have a log of it. And every single time the control will win. I've never seen it work for anybody else. And so this is where it's important, whether you work with Ned or work with another agency, whatever it is, having that log is very important because you're going to have somebody come in and be like, well, best practice is this. We should test this. You don't want to waste time. Right. And you don't want to cause any losers because of the lack of just historical data that you don't have.
Correct.
You know?
Yep. You nailed it. Exactly right. Exactly right. And it's like, until you can provide a new alternative hypothesis to me, it's like, that's the truth. And that's what we're going to lean on. Right. And it's the truth until we can invalidate it with something new.
Exactly.
You know? So, and again, this is kind of, very tangentially related to what we just mentioned before. But another big challenge that I see all the time is clients not quite understanding who their customer is and thinking they are the customer. And it's like, here's a line I give clients all the time, which is, whether you like it or not, you don't pick your customer picks you. So a lot of times brands will say, hey, we are premium. This happens all the time. And it's like, okay, well, let me run a price elasticity analysis and determine to what degree your consumer archetypes are falling into brackets that are traditionally more price sensitive or not, and just classic discretionary income and willingness to spend and things like that. And it's like, ooh, you're actually not, like, I hate to break it to you, but you're actually not premium. And that's okay. I mean, some of the most famous brands ever deal with audiences who are the most inelastic, you know what I mean? So it's like, again, it's okay, but a lot of times they'll be like, no, we're a premium brand. We only shop to premium consumers. And it's like, you sure?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes you are blinded by that, and they'll think that their patterns and how they buy will dictate the direction of the brand because that's representative of the users, and it's more often than not not the case.
Fair enough. So a lot of mistakes that people are making.
Yep.
We've gone through them, especially the homepage redesign, because as Ankit is developing the brand ongoing, he's always sick at looking at the website day to day, right? And so we definitely made that mistake where we tested both. And it ended up failing just a little bit, right? And so the decision we ended up making was, if it's only a little bit, I want it completely different, and let's move forward with it. Which, in hindsight, was probably the biggest mistake we made, right? And so over time, we've ran even more tests to kind of get things going. But if I were to go back and redo that, I would have him test a redesign for each section first, but then also go and look at the data and say, well, is the homepage not performing at all?
Yeah.
And it's like, should we be changing anything? Like, is it in a good place? If it is, why are we touching it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think really good emphasis on making sure that your decisions are data backed and not emotion backed.
Correct.
So with that being said, I know we talked on a few tidbits, but what's the one piece of CRO advice that you would give to business owners right now to take back and implement in their business?
Yeah, sort of an all-encompassing one is learn to put yourself back in the shoes of the brand new user. Where do they go? Where do they not go? Very important. And what are they asking themselves in that journey? And you will completely revert a lot of your preconceived perceptions on what to do and what not to do.
All that. Chew on that. If you want more from us, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, follow us on TikTok, and check out the website, chewonthis.io.